In this project, we'll take an interface that I've already created and make it work so that we end up with this little tool that will convert miles to kilometers. And through doing this project, you'll get to use a bunch of the pieces we've talked about already, learning JavaScript. You'll capture data from a form element and manipulate the DOM, change the DOM by adding this actual conversion down here. And we'll do a bunch of the different types of things that we've been doing so far with JavaScript to create this little tool. And the interface is already created. You can see I have it over here. The HTML generates this interface, but at this point it doesn't function. So our job today is to make this thing actually function and write the JavaScript to take the data that somebody types into distance and convert it to miles. Convert it to kilometers. So yeah, let's take a quick look at the HTML that we have here. Nothing too fancy here. We just have some basic HTML with a form and a container down here where the answer is going to go when we convert the miles. And then I've got some styling over here already in place, probably more styling than I really need, but that's okay. We don't need to touch any of that. At this point, what we're going to do is we're going to add a script tag down at the bottom and start figuring out how we're going to capture this. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and add a script tag here. And then in here, we want to capture the submission of this form here called convert. So we've got an ID for the form, so convert. So we want to do down here, we want to have a document .get element by ID. And then we want to get the ID convert. And we want to add an event listener. Add event listener. And the event we want to capture is a submit event. When the form is submitted, we want to do something. And what do we want to do? We want to run a function. Now, all the rest of the code for the script is going to go between these two curly braces here inside this anonymous function. So I can click there and move that down. Okay, great. So we've got our event listener here. Now, normally when events happen like a submission of a form, what happens is either the data from the form goes to, if you have an action in here like we do here on this form, it would go to some PHP file to be handled. Or if you don't have an action, if you don't have this attribute here at all, then what it'll do is it will actually refresh the web page. And we don't want that to happen. We want to stop the normal processing of the form. So in that case, we're going to pass in the special event object. And we could pass it in as event, or some people pass it in as EVT, or some people just use E. I'm going to leave it as event just to make it clear that that's what it is. It's the special event object. And then we're going to keep that form from being processed by using event.preventDefault, which is a method that will keep that form from getting processed and from refreshing the page or trying to go to that PHP file when we submit the form. So that's the thing we want to do first here. The next thing that we want to do is we want to capture the data that somebody typed into this input field here with the ID of distance. So we want to capture that data and we want to put it into a variable. So let's make a variable distance, var distance. And then how would we capture that data? Do you remember? Do you remember how to get that data out of that field? See if you can think about how to type in the rest of this on your own for a second and try it. Just try to see what you can get. Try it and see what you get. See if you get what matches what I do here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put mine in, but hopefully this is what you got. Document.getElement by ID. And which ID do I want? I want this ID distance. And what do I want from there? I want the dot value. That's going to take whatever somebody's typed into the field and stick it into this variable distance. Let's give it a try real quick. we do alert distance, we should get that data coming up here. So if I come back here and refresh this and then type in 5 and click convert distance, you can see that the alert pops up and it gives me a 5. If I put 54, it'll come up and it'll give me a 54. So that is capturing that value. It's preventing the default behavior of submitting the form and trying to go to the PHP file. If you don't do event prevent default, let's just see what this happens for a second here. If I just comment this out and come back here and refresh this. If I don't do prevent default, convert distance, it gives me the 5, but then tries to go to some PHP file, which we don't want. So it is getting that data, but then it's trying to go through to the form. So we don't want that. We want to prevent the default behavior, and that's what that does. Okay, great. So we're getting that distance there, and we're off and running here with our project. Let's pick it up in the next video. The next thing that's important to understand is that when you type a number in here, JavaScript sees that number as a string. So if I type a 5 in there, it'll be a string that holds the value 5 rather than the number 5. And I need to actually take that number, that string, and convert it to a number. We could use a method in JavaScript called parseInt, but what parseInt does is it'll only capture the integer of the number rather than a decimal number. And it's possible that I would want to capture 5.5 miles and convert it to kilometers. So what we're going to use instead is parsefloat. And what parsefloat will do is it'll allow us to take that number and convert it to a floating decimal point. So down here, I'm going to leave the alert for a second here, but just before that, I'm going to say distance equals parse float distance. So I'm taking distance and running it through parsefloat, then assigning it back the distance, and I can alert that out. So let's just see what that gives us over here. If I come back and refresh this, you have to refresh it. If I put in a 5 and convert distance, it'll give me a 5. But if I put in chicken, it'll give me NaN, not a number, which, as you know, resolves to false. Okay, so not a number is false, it's falsy, just like 0 or a number of other things are falsy. But a number is true, so 5 will work, 5.5 will work. Interestingly, 0 won't. 0 is still false. But I don't know why you'd want to convert 0 miles to 0 kilometers to kilometers, since they're both just 0. But that's what we need to do first, is to get that to turn into a number. Now down here, we can actually combine these two lines into one line here. Instead of having this distance and then assigning it back to itself, we could actually put parsefloat here with its opening parenthesis, and then we can close the parenthesis at the end after the value. And we can get rid of this line. So that does the same thing all in one line. It takes the value from the distance field and then runs it through parsefloat and assigns it to distance. Remember, JavaScript works from the inside out. The next thing we need to do is check to see if distance is an actual number. Instead of, if somebody put in something that's not a number, we can't convert that to kilometers. So we need to make sure distance is a number. So we can do that with an if statement. And remember, if we put in a number like 5 or 5.4 or 25 or whatever it is, that's going to come back true. That's true. That's truthy. Whereas if you put something that's not a number, Parsint is going to convert it to NaN, which is not a number, and that comes back false. Or 0 will come back false, those kinds of things. So we can just say if distance. So if distance is a number, because we're getting a number here, then we're going to convert and round the distance. Otherwise, and then put the answer down at the bottom. Otherwise, we'll display an error message down at the bottom. So let's go ahead and add this if statement down here. And we probably don't need this alert for right now, or I might end up moving it in a minute. If distance, we're going to do something there. We're going to convert and then display the answer. Else, display error. Okay, so let's actually take this alert distance here and stick it in here. We don't need it up here anymore. So you'll see now with that, if I test this, if I put a number in here, it'll alert out the number that I put in there. If I put something other than a number in there, it won't, because the else is running. We haven't actually done anything with the else, but it is running and it's not doing that alert. Okay, great. So we're all set up here and ready to write the rest of our script. Let's go ahead and work on that next. So I'm going to make a variable here. Get rid of this alert. Make a variable var conversion. And I'm going to assign it the conversion, which is distance times 1.609344. And what that will give us is the actual distance converted. But it's going to give us a very large number, or a number with a lot of numbers after the decimal point, potentially. So if I just do here alert conversion, make sure I spell that variable right, and test that, you'll see what I mean. If I come back here and refresh this, if I put in a 5 here, I will get 8 point, I don't want all these decimal numbers, and I can get even longer than that. I did 5.54.32 or something like that. You can see that's kind of long. I just want 3 here. I just want 3. So there are a couple different ways of addressing this and dealing with this. I'm going to show you kind of the manual way and then a way that's a little bit easier, because I think sometimes it's nice to see the manual way. So I'm going to make another variable var to rounded conversion equals math.random, not random, .round. Math.round. Now, if I just put in math.round conversion, what that's going to do is it's going to round it to the nearest whole number. And I want some decimal points in there. So really what I want to do is I want to take that number and multiply it by 1,000. And then after the conversion, divide by 1,000. So that's going to take the number, round it, and then divide it. And we might need an extra set of parentheses here just to make sure that it does the inner part first. So we round that. We take conversion, multiply it by 1,000, round it, and then divide it by 1,000. And let's see what that gives us. If we come back here. Now if I try to convert this, 54.32. Whoops, I have an error. Let's see what I did wrong. There's always a good way to see what's going on here. Console, or did I not actually do the I forgot to do the alert. That's what's going on here. Alert, rounded conversion. Try that again. 54.32. Convert distance. And you can see that it's cropping it off here after 2 decimal places here. Really, I wanted more decimal places than that. The other thing you can do that's easier, a little bit easier than this, is to use something called toFixed. It's a method called toFixed. So I could take conversion and put toFixed and put a 3 in there. And that will make sure it gets rounded to 3 decimal points. Let's see what that does. $54.32. And now I'm getting 87.420, which is the right thing there. So that's actually rounding it and making it work exactly the way I want it to go, giving me 3 decimal points. So that's kind of the easiest method to work with here is toFixed. Now I can actually put this all together in one line also. So I could do a parenthesis here and a parenthesis there. So it does that first and then dot toFixed 3. And let's see if that works. $54, convert distance. Oops, I did something wrong there, didn't I? Now do I have an error? And look, you can see I have an error. Console. Rounded conversion is not defined. Over here, when I did this, I needed to change this variable here. So you can see how I figured that out. If it says rounded version, if it says a variable is not defined, you either spelled something wrong or you're using the wrong variable. So let's fix that. That's a really good example of the kinds of things that can go wrong. Your inspector is your friend. Always go in here and see if you can figure out. Sometimes the messages are a little obtuse, but usually with some experience, you get to sort of see how that works. So there it is. That's working just great. Okay, cool. Now we're ready to move on with the next part of the script. Okay, one thing we want to look at really quickly here before we go on with the script is at this H2 down here. So right now I have an H2 in there with a class of invisible. And if you go look at the styles, you'll notice that this class invisible over here in the styles is doing something to make that, it's basically setting the color of that text to the same color as the background of this div. And over here, if you go and actually look at this thing, you'll notice down here that that answer is in there. It's in there. You can't really see it because it's the same color, but it's actually there. And it just says, currently what it says is answer goes here. But what we can do is we can use inner HTML to replace this entire H2 in here with a new H2. And that H2 that we put in there won't have the class invisible, so it will be visible. So we want to get this div ID answer here first. So up here, let's get rid of this alert. We're going to work on this display piece here, so I'm going to get rid of that. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a variable var answer and set that to equal to document dot get element by ID, answer. So that's our element there that we're getting, and then we want to get that element, and we want to use inner HTML. So I'm going to say answer dot inner HTML equals quote quote, and in here I'm going to add an H2, which opens and closes, H2. It's always best to open and close things right away. And then in here I'm going to say actually, rather than use the quotes here, I'm going to use the tick marks. So like that, semicolon. Let's do that again, H2, close the H2. There we go, because this is going to be a string literal when we're done here. Okay, so in here, I'm going to add the distance. Oh, let's see, what do I want to put in here? I want to put in here distance miles converts to X kilometers, right? Where distance is really this variable distance here. So that's going to be a variable. So in there, I'm going to put curly braces, dollar sign, curly braces, distance, because that's a variable. Miles converts to, and X is going to be dollar sign, curly braces, conversion. You can stick conversion in there. And that should actually work. So let's see if that actually works. Come back over here. If I refresh this page and put a number in here and click convert, you can see 5 miles converts to 8.047 kilometers. And so that works perfectly fine. That's great. The next thing we need to do is handle the error down here. And we're going to put it into this same element here, this answer element here. So I could use document dot get element by ID and go get this answer div again and use inner HTML again. But since we've already gotten this and put it into this variable here, it makes more sense to move this variable out of the if statement and stick it up here somewhere. Go anywhere really. I'll stick it here. So that's going to get defined to begin with. It could even go after the prevent default. It could go anywhere really, but I'm going to just put it there. And then I can use the exact same variable down here. Answer dot inner HTML equals. And now I don't have to use the tick marks because I'm not going to pass any variables in here. So I can just use regular quotes, H2, close the H2, always open and close before, and then work on the inside from that way. Please provide a number. So that will handle the error. So let's make sure that works. If we come back over here and refresh this, if I put a chicken in here, a chicken cannot get converted to kilometers, so it says please provide a number. But if I put a number in here, that will convert just fine. So our little converter is working great, and that's awesome. This is our entire script, and it's working pretty well at this point. It seems to be working fine. And we've done a little bit of refactoring to kind of get it to a little bit more compact and a little bit more readable. We've tried a few different methods to make that all work. And it's all working great. And we could leave this script at the bottom of the page. There's not that much to it, and it's fine. But just for the sake of practice, let's move it to an external file and link it up, and then use our scope and best practices for converting everything. So over here, I'm gonna come over here. I'm gonna make, whoops, I didn't mean to make a folder. I'm gonna make a file and call it script.js. And on that file, I'm going to add my IIFE, my immediately invoked function expression. So that starts with parentheses, and then in there I add a function with its parentheses and its curly braces, and then another set of parentheses and a semicolon. So this thing will run when the script file loads, it'll run. And my script is going to go inside the curly braces. So I'm going to move those down. And also I'm going to add in here use strict, my use strict directive, which is going to make sure that I'm not defining any variables without the var keyword. They don't get put into the wrong scope. I don't really have to worry that much about scope here since it's all pretty much within this one event handler, but still it's a good idea to put it in. So then I'm just going to copy all of this stuff, or you could cut it and paste it over here. There we go. There's our script. And in here, I'm going to come in and change my vars to either const or let. I think they will all work with const. Distance is going to get that once, and distance is not going to change. Const is going to come down here. And answer is always going to be answer. And then this one here, const as well. Conversion. So we've got all of that set. All right, great. Over here on my HTML file, instead of having the script here, I can leave it at the bottom of the screen if I want. That's fine. And just link to it here. src equals quote script.js. And that should work just fine. So if I go ahead and test that, it should work exactly the same as it worked before. And it works fine. That's great. Now, I could also move the script up into the head of the page, up here into the head. But I have to add the defer attribute here. Defer. Okay. And if I come back and test it, you'll see that still works. If you forget the defer attribute up here, then it's going to try to run that script before the page loads, and it won't work properly. Your file couldn't be accessed. It's trying to go to the some.php file because that script never loaded and it never prevented the default behavior. So that didn't work. So you need to have that defer keyword in there to make sure that this script is deferred until the rest of the file loads. But there we have it. It's a great little tool, and it's allowed us to practice many of the things that we've been talking about during this course. And we'll look at a slightly more advanced version of the project next.